Did you know that DigiCars offers a turnkey digital buying experience from the comfort of your home or wherever you are in just a few easy steps?
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Industry Spotlight. And today we have Abdullah Veraschia from DigiCars. And Abdullah has a very well-established profile, having presented and consulted in over 60 cities globally. Abdullah has been recognized as a leading speaker, disruptor, strategist, and thought leader on competitiveness and the interplay between strategy and innovation. He speaks and consults globally in this area. Welcome, Abdullah.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be with you. Pleasure to be with friends and listeners of AutoTrader and to spend some time with you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it too. So, let's launch right into it. Tell me, a little bit about your background. I mean, that report card of yours was a mouthful, and I'd rather just kind of get what Abdullah's about directly from you. Tell me where you hail from and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So, George, I actually hail from Mpumalanga, from the cold city of Witbank, and then grew up there. Spent some time schooling in Nelspruit, and then came to Johannesburg to further my education. I became a lawyer by practice and then moved very quickly into the strategy space, where I now run a strategy consulting firm that helps companies, as you've said, in different countries to be able to build strategy, but very importantly, to be able to build strategy for the future. And I also teach at the business school Gibbs in this area of strategy. In this context, my relationship with DigiCars is through my interaction with a very close friend and colleague, Dawood Olga, who's the CEO of DigiCars and co-founded it with me. And so where my relationship in the automotive sector came was really my various interactions with him. So Dawood and I met on pilgrimage in 2010, when I was much younger and looked a little bit different. But 10 years ago, I think the world was fundamentally different. We had come out of this halo of the World Cup. We'd come out of the halo of 2010. And in that November, we went across for pilgrimage. And my spouse and I happened to meet his spouse and him, and we became very close friends in the 2 weeks that we spent together. I think it cemented a bond that moved forward. And in my various interactions with him, I realized that he's a phenomenal entrepreneur. He built a really successful business together with other colleagues out in the Far East, Nigel. And so as I discussed my work with him, the work that I do with companies in terms of thinking about the future, thinking about how companies need to evolve, thinking about how the world is fundamentally shifting, our various discussions emerged into, can we perhaps imagine what the future of the auto sector might be? Can we imagine where this might play out? And that's what really birthed the genesis of DigiCars. I must add that I have
sorry, Abdullah. Was there dealerships? Were there dealerships in play at that point in time, or was this a kind of cold concept?
So Dawood, Mohammed Umar, and many of our other participants and people within the ecosystem were running very successful motor dealerships out in the East Rand.
Okay.
Our conversation was really to be able to talk about what is the future of the automotive sector? What is the future of automotive retail? But not only auto, but really what is the future of associated sectors? What I mean by that is, I'm going to argue today, George, that, and I think it's been accelerated in the last 3 months, that we've had this cognitive rewiring of human behavior.
That's for sure.
The fact that fundamentally so much of how we think, how we buy, how we take purchase decisions, how we look at digital, the fact that the two of us are talking today, we've never met each other, but we've been able to connect at a human level, gives us a sense of how so much of what we do and see as a human species is going to change. And so that was the birth of DigiCars. And if I step to my left, you'll see that it speaks to the byline, which is where virtuality and actuality meet. And so that's the genesis of DigiCars, which is a business which has been in operation for 2.5 years.
So 2.5 years ago, which takes us back to about the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, that DigiCars was born, and born not out of lockdown, but very much relevant for lockdown and during lockdown. So how did the business actually get born back in the beginning of 2018, end of 2017? Did you just take an existing dealership and with Dawood try to create a virtual retail environment, or was it birthed out of sometimes accident?
Sure. So I think it's a mixed mash of various activities, some of it being accident, but some of it being a deliberate focus in terms of saying, can we imagine something new? And maybe let me go back to the period 2016, 2017. So Dawood and I, as I said, became very close friends. I have a particular passion and interest in motor vehicles. I've loved them from, I recall when I was 5 years old. I can recall the engines, the sound, the emotion, the passion. And I think he realized that I obviously have a deep passion and interest in cars and in driving cars. And so coming out of that was various conversations in terms of how his business has really grown very successfully, how they've been able to build a bespoke offering towards customers in the environment that they were operating in. And then in 2016, the two of us went across to the US for some work. In fact, for a business school program, but part of that was really hiring a really cool car and driving through the western part of the US. And so in driving, in driving 6 hours from San Francisco to Los Angeles, we had various discussions in terms of how is the world changing? How is auto changing? And how is consumer behavior shifting? And I recall we stopped in a place called Carmel, which is halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And we both said, should we not try and do this? Should we not give it a shot? And often, dreams, when they get actualized, become a lot more difficult when you start to implement it.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. Maybe the market isn't ready for something that's so disruptive, so different, so digital in its articulation. Maybe because the way we've understood and appreciated auto and the retailing in auto has been in a specific guise, and it's hard to shift adoption patterns.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think COVID has accelerated digital adoption. Let's look beyond auto, George. People who otherwise would not buy in an online context, all of a sudden are buying online. People who in any type of environment would not be interested on coming onto a Zoom call, fundamentally now have reimagined what it means to be able to connect and interact. And I'll make it personal. I have a number of people in my extended family from Australia to Saudi Arabia to the United Kingdom. And we've had a number of birthdays in the last few months. And it's incredible how older people in my family have hopped onto Zoom and have actually taught me about some of the functionality on Zoom. So it gives you a sense of how when human beings are forced to adopt, they do, and to adapt. And so we didn't do it. We didn't have hindsight of COVID, but I think we obviously had a perfect environment to come together. And it's been an incredible journey.
So tell me a little bit about your target market. Is it different to the traditional dealership? Is DigiCars trying to chase a certain customer, and why?
Sure. So maybe, starting off and really linking on to the previous question around COVID, I've been saying to many people in the last few weeks that the canvas that we're painting on, the environment in which we build our strategy, whether it be a retail player, whether it be an FMCG company, whether it be a mining company, has fundamentally changed forever. And in the last few weeks, I've been speaking to a lot of people who say to me, let's get back to the new normal. And I say, well, it's not about the new normal. It's actually about an entire new canvas that we have to paint on. And so if we use that analogy, if we have to paint on a new canvas, George, I'm sure you'll agree with me that we need to have a fundamentally new set of colors, right?
Yeah.
And maybe the mix of those colors are very different. And then we also need painters who acquire new skills to be able to paint on those colors. So that's very esoteric. Let's make it real into the conversation we're having. I say that if the environment changes, so too must the strategy. So too must the choices that we take at a country level, at an organizational level, at a sector level, and an individual level. And so part of this question around segmentation is for us first to ask, how has the environment shifted and changed? And the 3 or 4 things that perhaps I'll articulate. The first is that we've seen a massive increase in terms of consumer awareness and understanding. That consumers are a lot more aware and understanding of their purchasing decisions, and they have the power of technology and the internet to be able to arm themselves with information before they actually walk into any dealership environment. So that's the first. I think the second is, as we've seen the increase in terms of digital acceleration, consumers are demanding of a frictionless experience. Amazon type of experience where we take away and we demystify all of the complexity of buying a car and go back to what the magic is of buying a car. So go back to your childhood, go back to my childhood, go back to anybody, even somebody who's not a car fanatic. The purchase of a car is a special feeling. It has an emotion that is hard to translate in a verbal conversation, but it's something that you feel. And it's the magic that you see on the customer's eyes, in their hearts, in their hands, in their smiles, but even beyond that, in the experiences that they have with the motor vehicle. So, George, I think back when I'm 7 years old, sitting in a Toyota Cressida 3.0 at the time, which had that electronic dashboard, and going across with my parents to Durban. It's a memory that's etched in my heart. I can smell it, I can feel it, I can taste it, because the motor vehicle was a key part of that. And so the second is, yes, to embrace digital, but I don't think it's about digital. I think it's about phygital, this interplay between physical and digital. And so what we're trying to do at DigiCars is to be able to say, can we demystify all of the complexity that comes with a motor vehicle purchase? Everything from applications, everything from finding the motor vehicle, everything from going through a process of signing lots of documents. And let's do that and try and do that in the most seamless way possible. And then when you come to the dealership, let's make your experience memorable, that it's something that sits with you for the remainder of your car. And then the third part is, let's make sure that your experience is not just about the purchase of the car, but it's actually beyond the car. So let's find ways in which we can continue to connect with you. We can connect you with other buyers who bought cars from us. We can bring you into a beautiful eventing space. And so I think it's about phygital. So what is the segmentation of the customer? I think what we're trying to do is, no matter what segment or what type of car people come in and buy at DigiCars, it's a magical experience and something that's memorable for everybody. I think we've seen a shift in terms of segmentation, as I'm sure you've seen this obviously playing at a system level in terms of the auto sector, that consumers are buying down. But for us, it's about giving the same seamless, frictionless, magical experience for everybody, regardless of what type of car they're purchasing at DigiCars.
Well, I like that. I like that term you used, phygital, and I think it's closely related to what we talk about all the time, which is automotive digital retailing. Which is, people think automotive digital retailing is just purely putting up an online form or trying to get the consumer to engage digitally. But automotive digital retailing, or phygital, as you put it, I think is more of that seamless process. Is taking the digital world and almost molding it into the physical world, so that there's no barriers and the consumer almost doesn't even notice when he moves from one to the other or back. From that physical world back into the digital world, and I like that word phygital. It's kind of stuck in my head now. So in this world of automotive digital retailing, how has DigiCars really solved the problems or pain points that the consumer would have gone through in the traditional dealership? Because, as you put it, DigiCars started pre-COVID, pre-lockdown. You couldn't have forecast this, but you're in the perfect space to take advantage of lockdown and consumers not wanting to come to the dealership. So what are those pain points that DigiCars has solved, and which is now to your benefit during lockdown?
Sure. So I think some of the pain points have actually come from very personal experiences. If I go back to 2016, I often lamented with Dawood that I would be treated at a dealership where I walked into, and somebody who loves cars on a typical Saturday morning, I'd go in, much to the eye of spouse, Abdullah, there's better things to do than for us to go and see cars. But I would often do it. And going into a dealership, depending on how I dressed or how I came across, I'd either be treated in a certain way or not. And I had a number of very negative experiences. So at the heart, first, beyond technology, beyond data, beyond digital, was this relentless pursuit that we must give a customer experience that is different, that provides the same type of seamless customer experience for all customers who come into our environment, and to build with customer experience at the core, and to embed that as a philosophy amongst everybody who works at the dealership environment, and even amongst our stakeholders. So everybody, from the person who greets you, to the person who helps you with your finance application, to the digital marketer who's advertising your products, to the CEO of the business, to the sales manager, to the person who assists you in terms of your after-sales service, all have to appreciate that at the heart of what we're trying to do is amplified customer centricity, is to bring back the magic of that. So that's the first. I think the second is to be able to appreciate that data is the new oil, that we have data points have to arm us with the information and the insight, one, to amplify customer experience, but also to be able to shift how car purchasing behaviors and patterns need to play out. So what I mean by that is we often segment customers in a very simplistic way. So we would segment customers typically by saying if a customer has affordability between 400,000 and 600,000 Rand, then let's try and sell them a car in that environment. And I think that's a flawed process, right? What we've really got to do is to be able to put the power in the hands of the customer by saying that let's use data to be able to assist customers with their purchasing decisions. And we must be confident that we will give them a great customer experience, and we will sell cars that we're confident have all of the requisite checks that when a customer drives out, that they will have a car that's going to be right in its application, even though it's a used car or a pre-owned, pre-loved car. And that if in some cases there are some challenges, that we go through a process that we address them. So that's the first. But let's go to the data point. A big component of what we said was to be able to go much deeper in terms of data and the utilization of data, just to start to look at purchasing patterns by geography or by region or by expectations of why an individual wants to buy a car. So if somebody comes into the dealership, can we use some machine learning and data points to be able to ask some questions that is reliant on external sources? So as an example, somebody walks in, says, I'm looking for a car, and the questions should not be what is your affordability only, but actually, what is your reasons for wanting to buy a car? Well, I'm a single mom, I have 3 kids, I transport my kids to school every day. Okay, we've got one data point, you've got 3 kids, and you need to be able to put bicycles in the boot, which means you need a bigger boot. Number 2, what's important to you? Is it speed? Is it comfort? Is it safety? Is it the number of seats in the car? And that's the second data point as an example. A third data point is fuel consumption important to you? And if you feed that into data, you're a lot more armed to be able to assist customers in terms of the type of outputs that they have. And so I think data was a second big component. The third one was to digitize a lot of the processes that come through with buying a car. I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's really painful to go into an environment and sign many, many forms in a very short space of time. Let's rather send you stuff so you can read it. We can go through it with you. We can make sure we cover all of the legal legislative requirements. We go through a rigorous process, but are there ways in which we can digitize the process that it's a little bit easier for you? And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, when you come into the dealership, can we make this experience real and relevant to you?
Well, I suppose those 4 elements are exactly what a digital dealership of the 21st century should be focusing on, because you spoke to that one important element, and that was to digitize a lot of the complicated documentation. I believe, and I'd love to hear your opinion. I believe that the dealership environment, and I've been to DigiCars. I came to visit Dawood, and it's a nice, inviting environment. It's really nice to be inside the dealership, and everybody in the dealership is friendly. When you walk through DigiCars, everyone kind of looks up at you and has a smile on their face, and I think that goes down to your first point, and that is that basis for the culture. That is vitally important. That it permeates every single person. But the dealership really, and I'd love to know your opinion on this. The dealership really should be a place for the customer to experience the product, not for deal making.
I think you've got it so spot on, George. And maybe given that you visited DigiCars, let me give you a bit of a sense in terms of how that place came about and the design and the build of it. And some of it is so interesting. So I don't come from a design background, neither does Dawood, neither does Mohammed Umar, neither does all of the other very important people that have contributed to the growth of DigiCars. But actually, what I did was spend 6 months on so many different design websites, on Pinterest. I have a folder which is that thick with pages that I printed out in color that took the best of everything from campuses around the world to cool offices to office structures And in fact, just behind this picture here, if you walked in, there's a number of toy cars that you see at the back. Those toy cars were actually cars that I took out of my home library, and I put them on as we opened this dealership. And so for me, it was, how do we make sure that we give a multi-sensory experience, from the way the place smells, to the way people feel, to the type of experience, to the coffee that gets served, to the way they get engaged and interacted with. And also, very importantly, George, beyond the purchasing decision, that if somebody wants to come through on a Saturday to DigiCars, make it a comforting and welcoming space, irrespective of whether they want to buy a car or not, that it becomes a welcoming space that's open for people to come into. Have we got everything right? Are we at 100% of the vision that we started with in 2018? Without a doubt not. I think we're probably at 60%. There's 40% of things that are still in that space that I think we'd love to implement. But part of this is making sure that we don't push too hard and we don't bring the market along, or we don't create so much of futuristic elements that we lose the essence.
Yes.
And so I think we're slowly bringing this in. So there's some magical stuff that we've got in the pipeline that will come through.
Well, I mean, I love to just come to DigiCars, sit and have a cup of coffee. It's that kind of environment. I mean, in years gone by, we had bookstores, and we still got those bookstores. I don't see them as much anymore. Where you went to exclusive books, you could pull a book off the shelf, and they had a coffee shop that you could sit and read. But that's the kind of environment that I think is the closest descriptor when you walk into DigiCars. So getting kind of like down to the nitty gritty. Let's talk about something like finance. I mean, finance is a tough thing. People can't really stomach the amount of documentation and the process that is involved when it comes to applying for finance for a car. And oftentimes consumers are a little bit apprehensive in that they're afraid to get declined. So how does DigiCars solve, in the virtual world as well as in the physical world, those pain points specifically related to finance?
Sure. So I think there's obviously the one requirement, which is that it's imperative that we as a dealership, together with the finance partners in the ecosystem, make sure that we cover all of the bases in terms of the legislative and legal requirements. So that's a must, and it's a given, and it's something we've got to make sure that we do. What we then have to do is, with that as the base, as the anchor, is to work with the finance players to be able to, one, say, how can we work together to be able to provide consumer education, to take away some of that fear and anxiety that's often there. And so if you look at a lot of our social media, we've worked with partners like Westbank, where we've done some training videos, not with us, but actually with colleagues at Westbank that we interviewed, to be able to say, demystify the finance process for us. Give us a sense in terms of what does residual mean? What does deposit mean? Because if we really think about the customer experience at the center, then we must be able to make sure that customers are armed with all of the knowledge that they take the right type of purchasing decisions. So I think that's the first. The second is that if we are now in a space where a lot of processes have become digitized, then we must get into a space where we can start to digitize the elements of the finance process, that we keep the legal requirements, but we find a way that customers are able to, DocuSign online and be able to go through that process in such a way, and then come into the dealership and deal with F&I and engage with it, but to find a way to demystify and take away a lot of the complexity. So I think that's the second. I think the third is that it's the fine balance between how you manage some of the difficulty and complexity of buying a car, with making sure that you can augment it with the magic of that experience. So as an example, I often say that if somebody comes into the dealership and they still have quite a bit to do in terms of the finance application, then we've got to think about how do we find ways to make it easier for the individual. So to your example, when a customer has to wait for a period of time, let's make sure that we have visual technology that they can play a game. So when you walk in there, we've got a racing seat where you can actually play, sit into a car that you can drive. You can play FIFA on a PlayStation. You can have a coffee whilst doing that. We've got some cool books if that's what you want to do. If you need to wait a bit and you want to test drive another car, feel free to do that. So that at least we make sure that we find ways to be able to address some of that complexity and difficulty. So I think that's the one. The second one is for us collectively, I think as an industry, not DigiCars, not only the finance houses, but all of us, to be able to play a role in terms of consumer education and to find ways to be able to take some of that anxiety away. And the last, and perhaps the most important, which is where I think I see the future of this industry, is that a lot of clients in our environment have asked, because of lockdown, that we deliver the motor vehicle to them. And part of what our thinking process, if we had to put the customer at the center, which we've done, is to think about how do we reduce the anxiety of the customer. So John Galbraith, who's an American economist, argues that all of the great leaders have had this one characteristic in common. It's the willingness to unequivocally confront the major anxiety of their people at their time, and that and not much else is the essence of leadership. So as leaders in this industry, we've got to think about when we've got anxiety in terms of sanitization, where touch has become a taboo, how do we make sure that we cover all our bases in terms of sanitization of cars, giving people comfort and finding ways. And then I'm sure, George, when you came to our dealership, you've seen certain elements like we've got Peppa the robot.
Yes, I saw Peppa the robot. I was gonna ask you about Peppa the robot now. Peppa the robot was followed me around initially, and then had to go and charge.
Yeah, so I think we've tried to create some small touches, and as I said, I think there's a lot more that we'll bring in over the next year or two. It will further enhance the customer experience, further find a frictionless experience. And then I think what COVID has really taught us is that some clients actually would love that they go through this entire process and we're able to deliver the car at their home in the comfort of their environment. And there's some magical stories. Delivery of cars where when you get there and when the team goes there, then there's an extended family. And it's a moment of celebration, which is heartening. That when you go into an environment and you deliver a car and it's a gift for somebody, and the unwrapping is something that you see their
eyes light up.
Yeah, it's passion.
It's passion. So you touched on quite a few kind of things that resonate with me when it comes to that process. The first thing you touched on, which I really like, is demystification, and that demystification is something that is at the root of most anxieties. It's really just a fact that people don't understand. And what DigiCars is doing is demystifying finance by giving the consumer the answers to the questions that other people might think are silly questions, and the consumer might think, well, I better not ask that question because it's a silly question. But there's no silly question. So demystifying all of that stuff up front, whether online or whether in the dealership, and leave it up to the consumer to choose. Whether they want to get the answer to their question online or in the dealership, and then taking all of those processes. And one last question I have for you, Abdullah, is when it comes to digitizing those processes that you speak about, I see two elements here. The first element I see is digitizing the internal operational processes of the dealership itself, something the consumer doesn't see. And then there's the other element that most dealers at the moment are attempting to do, which is digitizing the front end, putting forms on websites. But for me, that is not entirely automotive digital retailing. It is a good first step, but it's not automotive digital retailing or phygital, as you put it. Putting a form on a website it isn't really digitizing your dealership, because at the back end, somebody's got to deal with a lot of paperwork that could be digitized as well. So tell me a little bit about those two elements: digitizing the back end of the dealership, which is what DigiCars has kind of done, and it's the thing that nobody sees, and then digitizing the front end, which is what most dealers today are doing.
Sure. So I think digitizing the back end has been a particularly tough process, because we're going into entirely new territory. We've had to build a bespoke, sophisticated, customized CRM system that really starts to automate all of the back-end elements, from application, from customer data and the security thereof, and all of the requirements around it, to how we interact among salespeople, to the way we're able to move from a lead and the generation of a lead to be able to move down a system. And the objective is twofold: is one, the protection of customer data. The second is to be able to take away the time on staff so we can get a better return on their time, because part of the philosophy of DigiCars is this concept of value that Professor Michael Porter talks about at Harvard Business School, that says, how do we make sure that we incentivize staff, that they share in the value in terms of the output from a dealership perspective? And so customers, employees are largely incentivized throughout the value chain in terms of the success of the dealership. And so part of that is making sure that the back-end CRM system has all of the functionality and capability to be able to take away all of the duplication, all of the elements that perhaps could be a much quicker, much faster through a digitization process. And then thirdly, is to be able to say, how do we make sure that the safety of that data is never compromised, and we've got some checks and balances there. And then at the same time, on the front end, as you say, it's not just about a physical screen, or it's not just about putting a video of a car or filling in a form digitally. It's actually the ability to be able to use data-driven decision-making, that the data informs where we amplify marketing. The data should inform the type of motor vehicles that we sell in the dealership. So if the data tells us that customer behavior over the last 3 months as a consequence of COVID and because of economic factors in the country has shifted purchasing patterns, that customers are now moving to a different brand or category of type of motor vehicle, then our buying patterns must be informed by that. Then the articulation of how we market must be informed by that. Then the type of cars we advertise must be informed by that. And so I think the data is the power behind it. And then it's obviously, to your brilliant point, it's the back-end CRM integration that I think is so important around that there. And so if I have to think about this journey as we started and as we bring this conversation to a close, there's 5 or 6 things that for me are critically important. I think if the environment changes, if this canvas is entirely new, we must think about how do we paint on a new canvas, which means we must be relentless in understanding how have consumer behavior shifted, and we must proactively adapt to that there. And it comes down to that cognitive rewiring. As human beings have cognitively rewired, we must build companies and brands that are responding to that. So that's the first. And that comes through from customer intimacy. It comes through from realizing that we don't have all of the answers, and we must talk more with customers. We must engage with them. We must have empathy. We must step in the shoes of customers. The second is this appreciation that segmentation is not just simplistic in terms of the amount from a car perspective that you're buying, but actually much deeper. It's about your patterns of behavior. It's why are you buying a car? It's what are you using the car for? And then using external sources of data to be able to assist you. The third one is to demystify all of the complexity in buying a car and go back to the magic of buying a car by using some digital experiences. The fourth one, to your point, is phygital. It's let's digitize where we can, the back end, the front end, the data-driven decision-making, and then let's make the physical experience magical for you. The fourth one is the unconscious bias that often comes in purchasing in any retail environment, that no matter who comes into our dealership, no matter the type of car or the affordability or the value of that car, or no matter even if somebody just is not interested in buying a car but wants to come and have a look at a car, that they come in and have a great experience, and that they leave with that great experience knowing that they can come anytime there and make this a space that they're comfortable with. And so it's an inviting opening space that comes together. And the last one is to be able to appreciate that different customers have different expectations. Some want cars delivered in their houses. Others want to come into a dealership environment. Others have come in there already having known what car they want. I'm that kind of buyer.
Yeah.
I do my research. I walk in saying, I want that car. You don't need to convince me. I've already decided that this is what I'm going to buy. And for us to have that deeper sense and awareness of the customer archetypes that are out there and to play a role. And finally, and George, this is an invitation to you and to, I think, everybody in the sector. I think we all have a responsibility collectively to work together on the future of the sector through consumer education, through thinking about the future, through having sessions like this here, through hopefully when COVID comes out for us to meet in a physical space and to dream about where the future of the sector is. And hopefully we can do that somewhere cool with some nice coffee.
I'd love to do that, maybe at DigiCars. So that's been fascinating, and your last point is spot on. The reason I do this, the reason we do this, outside of what AutoTrader really does for the bread and butter, is because we want to make South Africa a better place. We want to make this industry first world. I mean, I don't think it's there yet, but I have a passion to make sure South Africa becomes that first world automotive environment that you go to America and you go to England and you go to Australia and you see and you think to yourself, well, we've got this capability. Why can't we just do this stuff? So I'm very passionate about that, and one of the reasons I invited your good self to join me. And ladies and gentlemen, that's Abdullah Veraschia. Did I say that right, Abdullah?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you, George.
Good
it's been
stuff.
a pleasure spending some time with you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and that's DigiCars. And if you want to go and have a look, go to digicars.co.za and go and have a look at what they're doing. They're doing some incredible stuff, and that was our industry spotlight. And with DigiCars and Abdullah Veraschia, and I will see you next time.